Okay. Magandang tanghali. I'm Maris Cardenas, Executive Director of Center for Empowerment, Innovation, and Training on Renewable Energy, or Center, and co-lead of the Secretariat of the Responsible Energy Initiative Philippines. We're very happy to welcome you today on the International Day of Clean Energy, which is an opportunity for us all to come together to celebrate the progress that we're collectively making to advance the scaling of renewables in the Philippines. It is also an opportunity to reflect on the challenges that remain in unlocking our full potential to bring about a truly just and regenerative energy transition. This is the level of ambition at the very heart of the Responsible Energy Initiative. Achieving this outcome requires RE actors to recognize and act on the environmental and social risks in the production and deployment of utility scale RE. If we don't get this right, RE actors are likely to face increasing community opposition, which may then slow the energy transition at a time when it is more pressing than ever. With the scale of the challenge in mind, I'm pleased to share that today marks the 2-year anniversary of the Responsible Energy Initiative's launch in the Philippines. Our focus from the very start has been to support RE value chain actors in working across silos to not only recognize and act on risks, but also to fully harness our collective potential to bring about a fast and fair transition. Since our launch, we've been on an exciting journey, growing our cohort to approximately 50 organizations across the value chain, including developers, industry associations, procurers, financiers, multilateral organizations, civil society, and academia. We're so glad that so many of you are here with us today. So, can we briefly take a look at the agenda? So, as you can see, we have a very full agenda today, where Sumi Danarajan will further frame the discussion around the process by which the vision came about. Sumi is the managing director for the Forum for the Future Southeast Asia, the organization with which Center co-leads as REI's secretariat. We'll then hear from a selection of REI cohort members who will share their perspective on why these principles matter for real world decision making and how they can guide more equitable and sustainable outcomes as renewable energy deployment accelerates. Then this will be followed by a question and answer and a discussion on our next steps. Maraming salamat po ulit sa lahat for joining. And Sumi, I now pass the floor to you.
Magandang hapon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's taken us 2 years to get to this point, and obviously we're working with a very complex system, but it's a system that is moving and moving very rapidly. Just this month, a report was launched that tells us that the renewable energy capacity in the Philippines is expected to grow from something like 14 gigawatts in this year in 2026 to 34 gigawatts by 2031. That is a huge move that's being made, and we hope that in some way the Responsible Energy Initiative in the Philippines can play some role in ensuring that this acceleration happens and happens fast, but happens in a way that's fair, which adds to its acceleration. So my role today is to just give you a bit of a framing as to why we've brought about this vision and principles to begin with, how we developed it, and what's in it. So first of all, starting with our why. So we wanted to develop a vision and principles to give us clarity. As Maris said, we're a group of 50 plus organizations representing across the renewable energy system in the Philippines. So being able to have complete clarity on what the challenges that we're trying to solve for in being involved in the Responsible Energy Initiative Philippines is very, very important. Secondly, reaching that clarity together also meant being able to align on what the focal areas would be as they're seen from multiple perspectives across the system. And then finally, and you'll be hearing a little bit more about this later today, it would provide us with guidance on where to invest in solving this challenge through prototyping solutions. the how, and this is really important for us as the whole cohort to share with you all, because we see this as our uniqueness and also our complete value add to the renewable energy system in the Philippines. So the how, we worked as a collective effort across 50 organizations. Everyone was involved in some form or other in shaping this vision and principles. So that was no mean feat. We had a lot of fun making it together, but it involved a lot of rolling up our sleeves and doing work. Our workshops were workshops, as many of us speaking today will bear testament to. We used a systems level inquiry. As I said a few times now, the renewable energy system is a complex system. And in order to know where to intervene and intervene critically, the inquiry had to take a systems thinking approach to it. And that systems thinking approach involved many frames, from looking very deep using something called the TAL model or an iceberg model in the Western Hemisphere, to think about, not just what was happening in the system, but, what structures were keeping current systems in place that may not be as regenerative, as restorative, as rights respecting as we would like it to be. Looking at the mindsets, what's underneath that, as a way of really understanding, like, if you were to be able to build a responsible renewable energy system, where would you truly intervene to bring about systemic level interventions? The third how was using futures thinking. And this, in a way, speaks to the underlying values that we held as a cohort, which is, how do we develop a vision of a responsible renewable energy system that would truly honor future generations, those that are not here currently at the table to say, this is the energy system that we want, those that are not here at the table to say, please don't colonize our future by leaving lots of solar panel waste for us to deal with, those that are not here at the table at the moment to say, can you please build us a future clean energy system that would enable us to really be able to afford accessible renewable energy in a way that we know is maintaining the dignity of those that are producing it, the equity of those that are going to be giving up their land for it to be built on, and the nature that is going to be able to maintain its biodiversity while we build this new energy system for us. And that speaks to the what. What is in the vision and principles? There are experts on this panel today that will go through it in detail. So just let me end by saying, this is our manifesto for a responsible renewable energy system that is nature positive, that is inclusive and equitable, that is circular, that is respectful of the rights of future generations. I have on my desk today a quote by Robert Kennedy that says that each time a person stands up for an ideal, acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he or she or they send a ripple of hope. I hope that our responsible energy initiative is something that will send a ripple of hope for a future energy system for the Philippines. And may I, on that end, hand over to my colleague, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sumi. Just to check, that was RFK Senior, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed
I'm
it was.
Jonathan. Yes, yes.
I,
Thanks, Sumi. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jonathan Escatalla, Principal Strategist for Energy Transition of Forum for the Future and part of the REI Secretariat together with Maris, whom you heard earlier. And I'm very happy to see current and former colleagues joining us today. With that, it's worth pausing on what we just heard from Sumi. This vision isn't aspirational language for its own sake. It's a guiding star for the prototypes that REI Philippines is designing this year, for how we engage government and investors, and for the renewable energy system we are collectively choosing to build. The REI vision asks a necessary question. What should success look like? Not just in megawatts, but in outcomes for people, nature, and institutions. With that framing that Sumit gave us, we now move from why this matters to how it plays out in practice. So in the next few minutes, you'll be hearing voices from civil society, from RE developers, and finance, each reflecting on specific principles and why they matter for real decisions on the ground. They have been part of REI Philippines from the start, I'm very happy to say. As you listen, try to notice the connections. These principles do not stand alone. They reinforce and depend on one another. And may I just ask for us to please use the chat for your questions. My colleagues and I are monitoring the chat and they will help me surface the questions for our speakers after everyone has had a chance to speak. So let's begin. For the first speaker, to ground us in questions of equity, particularly for Indigenous peoples and women, we begin with a civil society perspective. Please welcome Ms. Roby Halip, Executive Director of the REI Energy Partnership. Ms. Roby, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and to all the organizers of this webinar. And we're happy to have been part of the establishment of the REI in the Philippines, including the formulation, brainstorming of the principles. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. I'll be talking about the principle on equity and inclusion, but this also cuts across the other principles of the REI. On equity and inclusion, we strive for an economically viable renewable energy sector that is rights respecting and that ensures fair and equitable outcomes for impacted communities with particular regard for women and indigenous peoples. From our end at the REI Energy Partnership with indigenous peoples at the onset, ensuring that the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy is people-centered and strongly anchored on the recognition and respect of human rights is critical in making sure that the energy transition is indeed just and equitable. Workers, women, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, youth, farmers, fisher folks, LGBTIQ, among others, should not just be considered for compliance, a box that needs to be checked in the long list of procedural processes required by the government. Particular for indigenous peoples, the implementation of the free, prior, and informed consent is important to ensure that any development interventions are aligned to our aspirations and development priorities. Again, this is not just a procedural process, but is anchored to indigenous peoples' right to self-determination, our collective rights to our land, territories, and resources, and to determine the development that we want for our generation and for the future indigenous generations. The FPIC must ensure that engagement starts prior to project design and implementation. It must ensure that everyone is involved, all voices are heard, and that there is transparency and clarity on the details of the project. Concerns are fully addressed, and decision making is collective. It's not just with the leaders, but women, men, youth, and all sectors of the community are involved. And more importantly, agreements coming out from the FPIC must ensure equitable benefit sharing and are implemented. We recognize the challenges in implementing FPIC in the Philippines. Indigenous people's rights and FPIC becoming just one of the checklists that companies have to comply with. The bureaucracy, the cost and time, and the lack of credibility of the government agency taking the lead in implementing the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, and also the reality that Indigenous communities are not homogeneous. But bypassing engagement with Indigenous peoples and the conduct of FPIC to hasten project implementation is not the right way forward, as this puts more risk not only to the project proponent, but more so with the affected Indigenous peoples. Imposed projects and manipulated FPIC or free, prior, and informed consent not only leads to project delays, but also results to severe social impacts to Indigenous peoples. The division of the community because of manipulation, co-optation is totally not acceptable. These are long-term social impacts that are most often irreparable and affects indigenous people's collective way of living. While challenges in the government process and of FPIC implementation remain, they should not be a hindrance for the private sector to establish genuine engagement and partnership with indigenous peoples. We are not against the transition to renewable energy. In fact, we are fully supportive of this and have also been initiating renewable energy projects, particularly micro hydro projects in our communities, with support from technical partners even before the energy transition hype. This is to address energy poverty in many off grid indigenous communities and strengthen our economic opportunities and protection of our territories and the biodiversity within. The Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous Peoples is fully committed to working with partners, UN and government agencies, private sector, and civil society to ensure that Indigenous peoples are not again further marginalized by this energy transition, but recognized as partners and have the agency to also lead and manage renewable energy projects in line with our self-determined priorities. With that, I hand back to you, Jonathan, for the next speaker.
Thanks, Ms. Roby, for reminding us that economic viability and rights-based outcomes rise and fall together. From personal experience, I've done some FPIC work as well, and it's tedious, but I know its importance. Thanks for saying that the critical processes such as the FPIC are beyond just compliance. Congratulations to the Right Energy Partnership for your great work. Building on that, our next speaker reflects on what it means to take a genuinely holistic approach governance and why governance is what makes commitment durable over time. Please welcome Ms. Agnes De Jesus from FPH, First Filipino Holding. Ms. Agnes.
Yes, I can turn on my video. Well, I'm pleased to introduce the REI principles, namely holistic development and strong governance. We recognize the interconnectedness of all natural systems, as well as the interdependence between their protection and thriving communities. The second is strong governance to uphold participatory approaches and establish robust governance mechanisms to ensure transparency, accountability in the long term. So I'm here today to share our experience as a developer on how holistic approach and strong governance helped us develop 14 geothermal solar and wind projects totaling 1,256 megawatts, and 1 megawatt can light up 20,000 rural homes. When we started with RE, it was a black box, a lot of restiveness on the part of the communities and the government. There were so many issues asked from us, from pollution to dislocation, to lack of consultation, to lack of benefits and others. And it was very, very taxing for us. We were like firefighters putting out the fire, so it was tedious. But while we were addressing those issues, we were also undergoing adaptive learning on what things work. But of course, it took additional 1 to 2 years and so many social and government engagements before we were able to get the right thing. And based on our learnings, we saw what worked. For example, we needed to put up an interdepartmental or an integrated team so that we are able to prepare and address the concerns of our stakeholders, including government. Second, we needed to also make sure that we come up with a balanced plan, not only for the benefit of the business, but also a plan that will protect nature and also look into the well-being of our host communities. We needed also to, and we learned that engagement is not one-off, that we should engage during exploration, during construction, during operation, or the whole life of the project. We need to have strong environmental and social policies installed so that it can be guardrails from our officers down to the field staff. And as a result of this, what we experienced for the past years is because geothermal needs steam, and therefore we need a robust forest ecosystem because of the protection of nature and also looking at the well-being of the communities around us, and of course, fully complying with government regulations, we found out these results and we've actually measured them. First, our forest cover increased by 22%. Our biodiversity net gain is 91%. We were able to reduce the forestry cases by 600% or 6 times, bring it down. We were able to give our communities livelihood that made them 80% self-reliant today. And of course, the most important thing is in some of our areas, like in Mount Apo, where we did the first free and prior informed consent in 1991. We were able to get our second prior informed consent a few years ago because of the partnership with the Manobos in the area. And most importantly, because of the protection of nature and the looking after the well-being of communities and complying with government regulations, we had unimpeded geothermal and RE operations for the past 42 years. 2 years ago, we joined the REI, and there are so many things that we learned from the REI. It helped us validate what things we did right, but more importantly, it helped us in looking at the gaps. The steps became more granular because the discussions were detailed. So it made us realize that we can still improve on our approaches, and the things that we are learning and what we learned in REI will be used to refine our protocols. So in conclusion, if we are able to promote and institutionalize what we are learning in REI, including its principles and protocols, we can certainly shift from a mode of firefighting to fire prevention and hopefully develop an RE project that is truly sustainable and is equitable, because it will be good for our business, it will be good for the community, it will be good for nature, it will be good for all. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Agnes. Very inspirational, from firefighting to fire prevention. With the engagement of FPH with REI, they've been able to clear the black box to something more understandable. I also liked what she said about engagement is not a one-off, but it has to be all throughout the project life. Thanks, Ms. Agnes. Next, we turn to what it means to move at the speed of trust and to ensure renewable energy creates dignified work across the value chain. Please welcome Mr. Bob Camo from Sun Asia Energy.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, sir. So good afternoon, everyone, and I think someone is taking their chance already. So I'm Bob from Sun Asia Energy, and I've been asked to introduce two of the responsible energy initiative principle, the people-centered and the dignified work, and to share at the high level how these principles shape the way we develop renewable energy project in the Philippines. So let me start by reading them. The people-centered, moving at the speed of trust, we engage communities in a clear and equitable decision-making processes throughout every stage of renewable energy operations and recognize the value of local wisdom. And for the dignified work, we promote decent work condition and opportunities for all workers in the renewable energy sector. And when people talk about a just transition, it can sometimes sound abstract, big words, policy language, and high-level commitments. What I'd like to do today is to make this principle feel more real by sharing how we try to live them out in practice. At Sanasia, being people-centered start with one simple idea. We move at the speed of trust. In our industry, there's a constant pressure to move fast, to align construction schedules and also the financing timelines and commercial targets also. But we've learned that if you move faster than the community is ready for, you don't save time, you create resistance. And I know most of you know this. So being people-centered means we don't just inform communities of our plans, but we involve them in shaping those plans. We listen. We respect the knowledge of people who have lived on that land or in water, like in Laguna, so long before we arrive. That required a mindset shift for us. You can build trust from an office. You cannot understand a fishing community by studying a satellite image in a boardroom. For example, here in our office, so we changed how we show up. We don't just met local officials and disappear, but we spend time where people live. We remind ourselves that we are the guests in their backyard. That means conversation, not presentation, and also listening more than talking, and asking a different question, not how we get this done faster, but how does this project fit in their lives. So the second principle is dignified work is closely tied to this. I think dignified work is about more than wages. It's about safety, respect, and opportunity. It's about recognizing that while we're building infrastructure, we're also shaping livelihoods. Let me share a brief example from our floating solar project in Laguna. We realized early on that focusing only on the individual workers is not or wasn't enough, but fishing incomes can be unpredictable. So we started looking at the household as a whole. So that led us skills training program for the wives of a local fishermen. Creating additional sources of income and greater, I think, family stability. So at the same time, we made a clear commitment to local hiring, targeting 80% of our employee will be coming from the local. This is not about charity, but it was a common sense. So the people of Laguna understand the lake better than anyone we could bring in. So they know the wind, the water, the risk during the storm. So we invest in the training that allows fishermen to transition their deep local knowledge into technical rules supporting a modern solar facility like the one of the biggest floating solar in Asia. So for us, that was a dignified work looks like honoring who people already are while giving them a place in the energy future we're building. So to my, I think, fellow developers here in the room, none of us get this perfectly right. We're amenable to that, and every community is different. So, but what we've learned is simple. When people feel heard, they become partners. Yes, building trust takes time. It takes patience. It takes showing up again and again, but the time upfront is what earns you sometimes no permit ever will your social license to operate. So if there's one takeaways I'd like to offer today, it's I think it's this: when we take people-centered and dignified work principles seriously, not as a theory, but as a practice, we don't just protect communities. We protect our projects and we strengthen the foundation of a just transition in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. A lot of memorable quotes from you. I'm very excited for our upcoming work together in April. Like you said, the speed of trust does not necessarily have to be slow, but it should be respectful to the communities. And what you said about conversation and not presentation, I like that very much. And then honoring people for who they really are, I like that a lot more. Now, so to search things up a bit, as renewables energy scales, the question is no longer whether we affect nature, but whether we can actively contribute to ecological renewal. To speak to this, I'm pleased to introduce to you Mr. Gary Espino from Sky Renewables. Mr. Gary.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Well, basically, going through the regenerative practices on how we operate in harmony with nature and strive to restore, replenish the ecosystem and the locations that and projects we work on. For us, restoration is not a side activity. It's part of the business that we're in. It reduces our operational risk. It builds community trust and aligns with where capital and regulations are headed. Decarbonizing the grid is essential, but sustaining the natural system that support life is also non-negotiable for us. That is the nature of positive means to us. Growth that gives back, not takes away. Now, in terms of insights on how we were able to accomplish this in our projects, we keep nature positive principles at the start by, for example, on the trees that are affected during the construction of our projects. We do have a tree replanting program that we implement together with the DENR. So every time a solar project or say a wind project is undertaken, this is a very strict rule, that we follow, the tree replanting program. We believe that RE development must not come at nature's expense, so restoring degraded land and protecting water resources is primary consideration for these projects. Secondly, the way we achieve this would be we also partner with the local community for scalable livelihood programs. That could be on renewable energy education with the local community, where ideas like setting up of electronic libraries in their home areas where we operate. We give out operation and maintenance lessons of panels to the local community, so that we can provide them employment during the tenure of our operation in that particular community. So we're able to give employment by giving them training on how to do operation and maintenance with the solar panels. We've also looked into providing scholarship to deserving members of our local community where we are present. We do that, and we identify definitely deserving students to provide scholarship. And then lastly, one of the things we are currently working on right now with a particular community we're working on is donation of solar panels to the local government unit, thereby increasing their awareness that clean energy should be available to everyone, not only to the private sector, but also to the local government. And then, of course, third item that we try to address is the growing concept of agrivoltaic. I think that was taken up already in the previous presentations. I don't want to delve too much into that. But Sky Renewable recognizes the increasing role of our projects that can play in enhancing both food and energy security in the Philippines. So that's how we manage the impact of our projects to the environment. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sir Gary, and long time no see. So I'm very happy to see you here. Congratulations on the great work you are doing with your communities. I agree, food and energy security are being addressed by these types of initiatives. I like what you said about restoration of being part of the business, and it reduces operational risk. And I especially like what you said about growth that gives back and not takes away. Our final principle, not the last but not the least, brings us to our circular economy thinking shapes risk, resilience, and long-term value. Please welcome CJ Hernandez from HSBC.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, just before I read this, just note that we're a bank. We're not really like directly a developer. But yeah, so circular economy. Let me read this to you before I share some points. Everyone. So circular economy, we thrive to innovate and implement circular solutions to minimize waste, maximize resource efficiency, and foster resilience. I feel like listening from the previous speakers, I think I'll probably just kind of preach again what they're saying, right? So I'm not going to speak a long while because again, what they've said kind of really encapsulates what circular economy. But I do think that there's 2 points here that I wanted to highlight. The first one really is when we look at circular economy, the immediate thinking that we have is really on waste, right? Because that's the usual highlight, right? When you say it's a circular economy or it's a circular design, that means that the waste there's plan or there's a strategy to address the end of life cycle. But the reality with circular economy is that, and then attaching it to RE is that we need to understand, and this is where we share values with REI, is that the understanding of RE development does not stop, or actually does not stop and begin with the construction of the assets, right? So it begins in the supply chain, right? The development of the parts, the importation, the people, as was mentioned, the social license to operate, the community, and then of course the construction, the developer, and all that, the service, right? How long the infrastructure will operate and provide electricity, and end of life cycle, right? End of life, meaning how do we manage the decommissioning and all that, and the idea of putting circular economy as a principle to our implementation here um, ensures that we take responsibility across the life cycle of the development, which we share our as HSBC, as a bank, we find value on this, primarily because when you look at circular economy, when you look at these aspects in terms of risk in the importation side, in terms of how we manage the decommissioning of plants, all of these, while are primarily for impact and for responsible energy build out and sustainability, these are all recognized risk management strategy as well, making sure that the project is viable and will stand and improve. Sorry, that stand at the same time and be resilient. And that is an asset that is sorely critical for developing and financing infrastructure such as renewable energy infrastructure. That's the first point, right? In terms of circular economy, what it is and how we see it, right? But the second point, which is a bit of like a lower or like a deeper understanding, is that we share the value of REI and the principles around system thinking. When you look at circular economy, we talk about linear and circular economy, but really the reality of that is that it's really system thinking, how things work in this RE system, right? That means looking into the stakeholders, the enabling policies, the challenges and risks, and understanding that from the developer, the community, the NGO, the policy developers, the development banks, and the financiers, we all have a role to play. And by having an avenue to sit down and talk, share insights, share perspectives that are unique to our industry, it creates creative and solutions that are critical and not optional in solving the challenges that we have here in the Philippines, and the people in the workshops, as was mentioned before, would appreciate that by sitting in with financiers on the table and developers in the table and the NGOs at the table, it kind of widens your perspective and understanding what really is a responsible, equitable, and also a bankable renewable energy development. And this is something that's very exciting, and we're very hopeful to see solutions that are brought about by this shared minds of thinking of the RE infrastructure as a whole system, from the start to the end, and from the developer to the community, the policy, and the financiers. So thank you, and looking forward.
Thank you very much, CJ. If I were to take one of the things that you said, I agree with you that RE deployment really does start with a critical understanding of the supply chain. I'm really happy that a bank such as yours, HSBC, really gets this. And I I would echo what you said about circular economy as one of the principles of REI Philippines, demonstrating that our strong belief that we can face these challenges with just and regenerative system thinking. So if I may weave a golden thread to all of these discussions, all of the speakers, I can say that a just and regenerative energy transition is a systems outcome, not just a single decision. So thank you to all our speakers. If I may, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, let me briefly draw together the speakers. Across very different roles and institutions, one message is clear to me. Progress depends on how well the system holds together, from land and nature to governance and capital to the lived experience of communities and workers. Ms. Roby, for example, reminded us that equity and inclusion are foundational. When the rights of IPs and women are sidelined, risk accumulates, often around land, consent, and conflict. When they are centered, projects gain legitimacy and trust. On the other hand, Ms. Agnes showed us how this connects directly to holistic thinking and strong governance. Environmental, social, and economic systems are deeply intertwined, and when governance or permitting breaks down in one place, the impact shows up elsewhere, in delays, in opposition, or in stranded capital. And then Bob brought us to the human scale. People-centered processes and the dignified work aren't soft considerations. They're operational strengths and they shape how projects are implemented and sustained. As he put it, we move at the speed of trust. And then Mr. Gary extended that lens to nature. He said that a nature-positive approach reframes RE from minimizing harm to actively contributing to ecological health, growth that gives back, not just takes away, ensuring that biodiversity, land, and ecosystems remain viable as deployment scales. And then we go back to CJ to close the loop, and that's one. Circular economy thinking pushes us beyond single project lifestyles, our life cycles, aligning capital, risk, and market signals with long-term resilience and intergenerational outcomes. Taken together, these principles make the vision tangible. They point to the kind of structures, capabilities, and coordination needed to support a rights-based, inclusive, nature-positive, and well-governed energy system. I'm thinking here of, I'm looking at some of the chats here. I can't see questions yet. But if you have any questions, you can type it, or you can, maybe one or two can raise their hands from the participants.
And what
There
we
is
can
a
do, oh, okay, sorry,
Yeah.
Jonathan, I was just going to say, if there's no questions yet, we can move to the Mentimeter to warm people
All right.
up. But it seems like Miss
Sure.
Agnes already has one, so go ahead, Miss Agnes.
I see. Yeah, I saw a question on free and prior informed consent. I agree with Mr. Peria that free and prior informed consent cannot be over administered. Rules will be just guide. Why? Because of the nature of the process itself. Cultures are very diverse. Based on my opportunity to engage with Mangyans of Mindoro, the Aitas of Zambales, and the Manobos of Mount Apo, we need to understand their have an ethnographic study to understand their structure and decision-making process. At the end of the day, while we will be guided by the rules of government, the most important, I think, is the mindset of the developer. The mindset of the developer should be, how am I going to protect the four bundles of rights of indigenous people? The right to ancestral domain, the right to self-governance, the right to social justice, and the right to cultural integrity. If you have that mindset, then everything else will follow, and you can get a good partnership with the indigenous people while also complying with the rules of government. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Agnes. And on your screens, there is a QR code. We invite you to scan that. And while
Jonathan,
you're doing that, I'd like to read a chat from for one of our participants. This is from Tanishi Nakvi. I hope I'm saying that right. Hello and thank you to all the speakers for sharing. I'm Tanisha from the Planetary Health Program of Sing Health Duke NUS Global Health Institute from Singapore. I appreciate the speaker's points on system thinking. I'm wondering how the health system is addressed here. How are health benefits of a just transition measured, especially regarding the health benefits of these specific energy sources and dignified and decent work in the RE sector? Thanks. Would anyone like Sumi or someone from REI Philippines like to speak to that?
Jonathan, can I just briefly add on to the FPIC?
All right, Mr. B.
Yes. Just on the free prior informed consent to add on what Miss Agnes said, no? There are examples where communities were able to assert their own genuine free prior and informed consent process in some projects. No, there's that case of Bakun micro hydropower where it was suspended because the free prior and informed consent was not genuine, and indigenous peoples asserted that it should be their ethnic process that should be respected. But I think beyond this bureaucratic process of the government, what indigenous peoples need also to be able to fully assert their collective rights is a safe space. We need we don't need red tagging in our communities. We don't need all this arbitrary arrest and detention for any opposition that's being done by communities. Now we need a safe space for engagement, a democratic space where everybody can air out their concerns. And just one fast point on circular economy, because we just finished our training of trainers of indigenous renewable energy practitioners. It's important that we not just utilize the resources efficiently, but in the project design, proper disposal projects are being implemented. It's important that the community is oriented on the proper disposal of the batteries when they reach their end of life, whose accountability is that, who gets it, who brings it back to the manufacturer for recycling. They should already be at the project design part and not towards the end of the project, so that we ensure that communities are also safe from these toxic waste that are coming.
Did we lose Ms. Ruby? But yes, just to emphasize also what she and Miss Agnes were saying, yeah, the importance of those principles that talk about inclusion and circular economy. Please join the Mentimeter. We've already given the link to the Mentimeter on the chat, and also the s- the QR code also leads to the Mentimeter, right? REI, is that
Yes, the
correct?
QR code is
Yes.
for the
Okay. Yeah. So the question is, which
Oh, wait, Jonathan, just as people join, I think Sumi will step in on the climate question.
yes on the health?
Yeah.
Sumi.
Sumi?
Thank you. Thank you, Tanisha, for raising such an important question and for offering us the opportunity to place the Responsible Energy Philippines within a wider, very important emerging narrative around climate and health, right? How do we see climate and health in a much more integrated way? And I think, what we'll take from this question is that the Responsible Energy Initiative can also add to this growing narrative around this by integrating it into our work. You've already mentioned a number of areas where we should be doing that. One certainly around dignified, decent work for the renewable energy sector. I think there's growing evidence to show that we haven't quite got the systems in place yet to ensure that workers, whether they're putting solar panels on roofs, whether they're working in the mines that are bringing out the critical minerals, whether they're in the building the turbines, have we paid enough attention to their health and safety and ability for dignified work? Probably not. So I think that is a critical area that we need to look into. I think the other areas where we can certainly integrate the climate and health narrative into are around the health sector, and in what ways might the healthcare sector be able to procure renewable energy at a much greater scale, because certainly the healthcare sector is a big consumer of energy, and its ability to transition to renewables and then to enable it to transition well is also a critical area. In terms of how to measure, I think that's a good indicator for us in the REI Philippines to look at how we measure those impacts. So thanks for the question. I think I see Miss Agnes also having her hand up there.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Tanisha. As a developer, we adopt the regenerative framework of reciprocity, which means that when we respect nature and sustainably manage natural resources, we develop a good environment for the host community. So that's how we reciprocate. And since people or the host community gives us a social license and sometimes become our human capital, we reciprocate as a developer by providing mechanisms so that we can avoid pollution and so that we can respect their rights. So it's really the principle of reciprocity, protecting nature to protect the environment and the communities around us, reciprocating to the assistance of our employees and our communities by making sure that we have mechanisms that will be zero pollution to also add to the good environment where they are and where we are operating. Thank you.
All right, so we can perhaps we can show the Menti so that we can encourage others to also join. We still have a bit of time. Can we show the Menti live? Yeah. So the question for the Menti was, which principle do you regard as the most crucial for enabling a just transition in the Philippines? So very interesting. A lot are saying it's people-centered, with equity and inclusion and a tie for nature positive and strong governance in third place. I think I have a question for the REI people, and it's related to this. Perhaps anyone can speak to this. For example, we might want to give them insights on how we went about aligning on these principles and why did they seem important during those early days of REI. How did we go about, what was the process for us to come up with these principles exactly?
I can try to have an initial response, but I think Ankit is on the call and he can then maybe speak a little bit more specifically to how it's been applied in the RE Hub work stream. And it's essentially that, we really we started off by looking at what were the key systemic challenges to, enabling a fast and fair energy transition in the Philippines. And so once we identified those 5 key challenges, which will actually be part of our March event, which we'll speak about later, we then used those systems tools, as kind of Sumi and CJ spoke to earlier, to understand what laid beneath those. We saw these patterns of things happening. What were the structures that held those patterns in place, and what were the mindsets, right? And so when we started to look at the different barriers we then flipped things on their head and we said, if this is the world in which we live where there's problems, what would the solutions look like? So like if we imagine the world we want to live in, what would be the enabling conditions? And to that, that's how we came about a lot of these principles, right? And so people-centered was at the very heart of it, very interconnected with that equity and inclusion, but then nature positive, to I think Gary's point, right? We cannot act at the expense of nature. In fact, we need to be enabling regenerative outcomes. And then there's nothing that holds all of that together unless you're taking a holistic approach underpinned by strong governance. And then circularity economy is the one that really comes to the fore if you think about resilience, not just resilience for today, but if you look into the future, what do we need to have in place? Well, if you only plan for circularity in 20 years from now when we're drowning in our e-waste, we will in fact be slowing the transition because there will be a backlash for a very high likelihood. So maybe because we don't have much time, we only have like 10 more minutes for questions. Maybe we keep going through the Mentimeter and then see if other people have questions instead of us speaking further to this. Is that okay?
Yeah. Cynthia, I just saw one question, so I'll read it.
Okay.
From
Yeah.
Ramnath Iyer.
Yes.
With the talk of new gas discovery and intent from the government to exploit it, is there any way to incorporate highlight in our communications the difference in how thoughtfully and community-centric way RE is approaching this versus the gas sector? So Ramnath is asking about the new discovery in Malampaya East 1, where a new reservoir has been discovered, and the Philippine government intends to exploit it to extend the Malampaya pipelines and give us some more natural gas as part of the energy mix.
Who will you be directing that question to? From
Who
our
would like
panelists?
to answer?
What is the question? How do we integrate?
Yes, Ms. Agnes, how do we integrate or highlight in our communications the difference in how thoughtfully and community-centric way RE is approaching this versus the gas sector? So perhaps, yeah, Ms. Agnes, if you have thoughts, or anyone.
I think there are many business cases for RE versus the fossil fuel. There's a host of um, positives for social, economic, and nature. But more than that, I'd like to share that there is a movement, or there's a program put up by DOE and DNR, and we should take advantage of that. The protection of the Verde Island Passage, because it was identified as an area of hope by Blue Mission. And in that initiative of DNR a year ago or 2 years ago, what they wanted was to make sure all the industries or the developers that will use nat gas around the Verde Island Passage will have they will have certain requirements and certain programs to make sure that they are monitored and to make sure that the Verde Island Passage, which is the center of biodiversity of the world, will be preserved. So I think we should engage that initiative of government, DOE, DNR, and all the businessmen that signed off to put up nat gas projects around Batangas and around Verde Island.
And to add to that, the Philippine government is really positioning nat gas as a transition fuel. So at REI, we say REI is Responsible Energy Initiative. And so we say, how can we responsibly ensure that transition is a real word with timelines and endpoints for natural gas, because it may have the risk of creating stranded assets and really being an obstacle to our real intent with this, which is the energy transition to renewables. It's a complex issue, and it's something that the Philippine government is really intent on doing, and so it's a reality where we need to, like what we said about one of our principles, be inclusive in our dialogues about how to approach the reality of natural gas coming into our um, energy mix.
I know that there is a study by UP in 2021 where they had this hourly modeling of all the technologies, and that actually shows how a transition fuel that we cannot go 100% RE now, and there are many things that must be done, but that should not stop us from asking government to follow the principles and protocols of REI if they're bent on really using it as a transition fuel.
Thank you, Ms. Agnes. So the next question for the Mentimeter is being flashed now. What principle is the furthest from yet being implemented in the Philippines? And our respondents are saying that strong governance is by far the principle that is not yet being implemented. Very interesting. A very far second actually is circular economy, and then after that is people-centered. Very interesting to note that dignified work, like the last question, has not been voted on.
Maybe that's a
Do we
great
have time for
segue.
one more question?
It's a great
Sorry.
segue because there's a question in the chat precisely about dignified work. Yeah, maybe to
I think I can answer that for that question of Gabriel.
Can you please read the question that's in the chat just so that everybody has the context?
All right. The question is, thanks all for sharing. I'm Gabriel, an independent journalist from Singapore. The people-centered and dignified work principle, which I shared, are on particular interest to me as I see countries accelerating their rebuild out and a lot of foreign investors getting involved. Now, wait a minute. Yeah. Getting involved, including from Singapore, to meet green power demands from this industrial zone and increasingly data centers. For developers on the call, what improvement do you hope to see in existing permitting or licensing processes in the Philippines to make the process of engaging community members as a partner on the norm? So I think for Sanisha, making community partnership the norm requires I think because we have a policy here, I think transforming the permitting process from a compliance checklist into a collaboration framework. So we specifically advocate for institutionalizing the benefit education. If you're familiar with the AR, so 1-94, we want to have a workshop on that. So during the permitting phase, to shift discussion from short-term transaction to long-term developmental planning, while also mandating formalized local upscaling plans. So that's also what one we want to do. So within the LGA resolution, to ensure that just transition becomes a tangible regulatory deliverable rather than just a concept. So by further streamlining the multi-partite monitoring team, because after we build the project, there will be a monitoring team for that. It should be formulated. So to empower locals as an active project auditors from day one when we start to operate. So we can ensure that permits serve not merely as a permission slips, sorry, but as a binding partnership agreements that treat the community as a co-owners of the projects as we move forward. Thank you.
Jonathan,
Yes,
our own Securities and Exchange Commission just issued last December 22 the adoption of the International Sustainability Standards Disclosure. And part of that would be the recognition of human rights and all of these social safeguards. And also the low carbon economy bill that's being discussed now in Congress also requires engagement of communities, even reporting on a regular basis the results of the consultations and the actions taken by corporations or organizations.
thank you very much, ma'am, for that information. Yes, and I was also going to say with Bob's answer that it also demonstrates that strong governance because as a principle of REI, because they were able to work with local government on ensuring that the dignified work is in place for at least for their project. With that, we can move on. So as we close, I'd like to return briefly to where we began with what Maris was saying at the beginning. International Day today is International Day of Clean Energy, and it's often framed as a celebration of progress. At REI Philippines, we also see it as a moment of responsibility. We're just showing you our arc for the next few months. For REI Philippines, we can see that we've already been developing our concepts, what have been talking about as prototypes and work streams. And we are hoping to do that, the prototype development um, per work stream until October 2026. In March, on March 19 to be specific, we have an event where we will be inviting all the stakeholders for us to launch these 6 prototypes. If you want more information, we can give it to you offline. But these 6 prototypes really speak to the principles and the vision of REI Philippines. Our invitation is simple but demanding, not just to agree, but to act together with REI Philippines. So with that, thank you for your time, your attention, and your commitment to making the Philippines' energy transition truly just and regenerative.
Thank you so much and looking forward.
Maybe
Afternoon.
yes, and
Yeah.
just to double check, are there any final questions before we sign off? Because we still have 5 minutes, but otherwise we're happy to give you 5 minutes back of your time. All right, if it's silent, then we will assume that
Thank you.
everybody's happy. All right,
Yeah,
thank you
please.
for great collaboration and cooperation, everyone.
Please coordinate with us, Cynthia and myself, flashing our email addresses.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.